University of Johannesburg. Karima, let's start with you. Of course, I just heard you say the next 48 hours is quite crucial.
Absolutely, Shahan. As we know, the ANC's top brass has descended on Cape Town. The entire, caucus is present. The ANC has called a three-line whippery. It means that every single member of the ANC needs to be in Parliament, and they need to uphold the party line, which is to vote against the motion of no confidence. And if one looks at the numbers, the opposition has 151, votes and rather seats. It needs more than 50 ANC members to vote along with it, because not all the opposition parties are in favor of the vote of no confidence. So we will have to now focus our attention on this caucus of the African National Congress. I think, what is it, about 240 odd members that they have, and we will have to see how that is going to break down. The ANC is a very divided organization. We will have to see whether President Jacob Zuma's stormtroopers are now going to be able to enforce, the position. I've just received quite a lot of SMSs from various MPs, many of them saying that the next, few hours are going to be absolutely critical. We will have to look at the way in which people are also people like Julius Malema and others who have said that if the vote is secret, that President Jacob Zuma will no longer be the president, will have to really demonstrate that they are able to deliver. But I think all eyes for now, Shahan, definitely on the African National Congress caucus. We will have to keep very close tabs on the way in which the wind blows there. People like Winnie Madikizela Mandela, for example, veteran MPs, we will have to get an idea of what kind of role they are playing behind the scenes. We saw the impassioned letter by Makosi Khoza asking MPs to vote with their conscience. People like Pregs Govender, former MP who voted against the arms deal, saying, make us walk tall again. So there's a lot of pressure. The ANC Youth League saying, put a stop to this. This is palace politics. This is about getting rid of a legitimately elected government. And then, of course, the political context in the ANC is very toxic at the moment, very divided, very factional. You can't put the succession race out. And then, of course, also, even if President Zuma should be voted out, he remains president of the African National Congress. He can call an early conference. He can decide who to deploy to cabinet, rather to parliament. He still has substantial power. Of course, psychologically, he would have been hit very hard, but he wouldn't necessarily be done, out and down and out. He will have the ability to retreat to the party in the NEC, and of course, because we have a party political system, he still has some measure of control. But of course, it will be a massive dent for him. The flip side is also true. If he wins conclusively tomorrow, then of course the African National Congress says to society, as an organization, we will deal with our own, on our own terms, in our own time.
And that could, of course, have consequences, Mia, in 2019, if, for instance, the African National Congress decides to keep President Jacob Zuma in charge of the country. Then they'll have long-term implications for 2019. Do we see the public then lose trust even further in the ANC if that happens?
Yes, this is not the end of the road in that sense. But I think this is such a momentous moment, right, that we should maybe hold on to it and try and be excited for once, because we've been, bombarded with so much bad news and depressing news. So let's maybe hold on to this and just keep fingers crossed for tomorrow.
Angelo, look at this decision by Baleka Mbete, and of course many are saying that she's going to run for president of the ANC, and this might have played a part in her decision as Speaker of the National Assembly and also an ANC chair.
Well, those critics, I think, will have to think very carefully should tomorrow's vote not go the way that they imagine it's going to go. Because simply because there is a secret ballot does not mean that people are necessarily going to vote the President of the Republic of South Africa out. So that's, to take from Karima's point earlier. But also this anxiety that people have that removing the President and the Cabinet from power is to remove the ANC from power, is to conflate cabinet and the president with the party as a whole. The party has 249 members in parliament, so they can propose a new candidate from within their own ranks to be the president. That person gets voted in, they have a clear majority, and that person appoints various members of the current ANC cadres in parliament into the cabinet. So this is a change of personnel, not a change of party. And I think it's important for South Africans to bear in mind that this is by no means going to remove the African National Congress from power in Parliament, in the National Assembly, or from power in the executive. Their numbers are simply too strong. They came back in to actually do the unthinkable at the moment, which is to suggest that Jacob Zuma is the replacement candidate come Thursday or Friday or whenever that election happens. That's the next test, because he can be removed, and the tragedy is he can be put back in. And that's an extreme scenario that I think many people should also begin to consider.
Now, Makosi Khosa did issue a really impassioned statement on people to vote with their conscience, Karima. The question is, though, we've seen some people come out openly saying, yes, we're going to vote with our conscience, one even saying that we're going to vote against the president. Do the rest of them have the guts to vote against the president?
You know, I think one must look at what the ANC political psychology and history is in terms of organizational culture. We must also look at the extent to which President Jacob Zuma has antagonized, his opponents in the party, and the desire of those who have sucked off the patronage teat linked to President Jacob Zuma and the Guptas and what they stand to lose, because that will give us an understanding of the extent to which people are prepared to go to protect what it means to have President Zuma in power. Now let's look at these two attempts to remove him in the ANC first, because remember the vote of no confidence, this eighth attempt, the difference here is that it is preceded by two efforts inside the ANC, in the NEC, to in fact, remove the president as the head. And I think the fact that those meetings couldn't conclusively decide on his fitness gives you a sense of what kind of, patronage networks operate, because politics at the end of the day, Shahan, is also about sets of interests. There are sets of material and political and economic interests that keeps President Jacob Zuma's faction, afloat in the African National Congress. Those interests are not going to disappear because we now have a secret ballot. Of course, the caucus itself is a contested terrain. We've seen how opponents of the president, backbenchers, people like Pravin Gordhan and others, have begun to exercise the power. They've done it in the committees, but we've also seen fight back. We've seen the Social Development Committee chair, for example, protect someone like Batabile Dlamini. President Jacob Zuma is in Cape Town. He's going to engage with that caucus. We've heard the words of people like Fikile Mbalula calling people who will vote with the opposition as suicide bombers. Gwede Mantashe calling out Mondli Gungubele as highly ill-disciplined. So there is a tradition, of course, of not wanting to be seen to be siding with the opposition. But of course, there's also a real realization among opponents of President Zuma how costly he has been for brand ANC. The defeat of the party in the metro elections last year is going to weigh heavy on the minds of people, because presumably those who want to continue to be in charge in the African National Congress also want to be in charge of the country. They want to continue to be able to govern, and in order to reconnect with people, they will have to be seen to be doing things differently, recalibrating. So there's a multitude of factors that impacts the decision. And of course, one can't rule out self-interest. It is not clear whether the ANC can en masse from Luthuli House sack all the MPs should they vote in a particular way. But we also have to understand that some people have no other employment except being deployed to Parliament. So there are a range of issues, from self-interest to political preservation for the ANC itself, to those who've benefited from President Zuma being in charge. Many ministers, people like Minister Zwane, people like Batabili Dlamini, Faith Mutambi, they have no interest in getting rid of President Jacob Zuma. They are going to fight tooth and nail for him to remain in charge. So, like I said, all eyes on that caucus.
Now, let's talk about the work of the opposition in the next 24 hours. Are we expecting, Mia, to see people like Julius Malema, who always says he's quite in touch with ANC MPs, to try and go on the charm offensive again, just to text secretly and say, hey, what are you planning to do tomorrow? Can we expect stuff like that to happen behind the scenes?
I suppose. I don't really know what his modus operandi is, right? I also think that he'll probably be in celebratory mode, and that we'll see a lot of that. But what I do want to mention, if you will allow me, is the importance of this patronage networks idea, right? One political commentator over the last days wrote that an MP gets 80,000 rands per month for just showing up, right, without even doing anything. So I think it is a very compelling question whether, you know, someone would give that up in the name of conscience if that same person has not resigned from the ANC in the name of personal conscience, or because of his or her personal conscience, when we've seen, you know, such, you know, an array of wrongdoing, morally problematic decisions on behalf of the president, for example. If conscience didn't play any role so far, right, what will it really mean to vote according to your personal conscience tomorrow?
Now, of course, Angelo, if you look at that, what Mia is saying, some would argue that many of the MPs might vote with their conscience or think that the president's not good enough for the job, but they have an obligation to the party, they have an obligation to the people of South Africa to actually stay in Parliament and then make that right decision tomorrow in the secret ballot, which is why some of them didn't leave in the first place. We saw with Mcebisi Jonas, many were saying, why didn't you stay so that you could actually vote against the president when the no confidence motion arises?
Well, that's a question that I think is, what is personal conscience? Because we know that the African National Congress comes from a very long history where personal conscience was supposed to be secondary to political discipline. Because in a liberation movement, personal conscience means that you can't just act out of some sort of noble sense of yourself, because other people may die as a consequence of your individual desire to step away from party lines. But that was in the liberation movement phase, where people's lives were on the line precisely because of the risks run by an underground operation in the fight against an apartheid regime. In governance over the last 24 years, many people have argued that the ANC has had to unlearn many of those early habits of secrecy. So it's ironic that what you have here is the Speaker of Parliament invoking the importance of transparency, while at the same time indicating her necessity of protecting people from precisely that kind of punitive action. So when people say they're going to protect their conscience, the question will be those people like Pravin Gordhan who decided to stay. What is it that he will see as guiding his conscience? Is the survival of this particular government in power the conscience vote, or is removing this government and replacing it with a better ANC government the role of an ANC MP in Parliament at the moment? Because would that be what the parliamentary speaker indicated, is the way in which parliamentarians fulfill their function of holding the executive to account? To go back to Mogoeng-Mogoeng's judgment on the 22nd of June, he said it doesn't even have to be actual wrongdoing. All it has to be is the appearance of wrongdoing or the appearance of not being responsive to parliamentary oversight. So it's not the substance of it necessarily, the appearance. All that has to happen is for members of Parliament to lose faith in the President's accountability for them to proceed along this path. So this isn't whether or not President Zuma was behaving irresponsibly, it's whether MPs believe that he is no longer responsive to their accountability function in Parliament.
All right, we're going to hold it right there. We'll get back to you a bit later. We're going to take a break. Of course, there was political analyst Karima Brown, our senior researcher Angelo Fick, and University of Johannesburg professor Mia Swart. After the break, we'll speak to our reporter Artyom